A couple were in a backstreet bar having cocktails and watching a electric mariachi band perform standards like Peggy Sue and Let's Spend the Night Together. The male told his partner that he's going to take a call and heads outside the bar onto the back streets. As he was calling, he notices a black hover van slowly heading towards him. He thought it was a delivery van and took nothing of it. Then the hover van got nearer and nearer towards him. He finished his call and then curiously walked towards it. He looked through the blacked out windows and then reached the side door. Suddenly a bulbous baby-headed being in a green surgeon's gown quickly emerged out of the hover van and incapacitated the male with a needle being stabbed into his neck. The hover van quickly raced out of the back street and drove off out of the sight. The female was still at the table sipping her cocktail waiting for her partner to return. As the hours progressed, the bar was preparing to close and the bartender asked her to leave. She walked out the bar and looked around for her partner. She even tried to call him that until she notices his device on the ground and realizes that either he was kidnapped or killed or even both. She panics and enters an emotional state. Following the suicide of Elias Hilpert, the doctor tries to cheer Louisa up and says they're going to a planet where tourism thrives in its dozens. Louisa says, is it like Florana where its government dump toxic wastes as they please? The doctor pondered at first and thinks where they are going doesn't have any of that. The TARDIS made its landing noise and he was rubbing his hands together. Louisa was still a bit unsure about it but kept a positive outlook, and then the doctor opened the doors. The two walked out and he says this is the planet, Barcelona. Louisa's first thought was Spain, but it didn't look anything like the Spanish city, but its architecture were heavily based on the imagery of sand castles, and like the doctor said, it was flooded with tourists. The doctor took a deep breath and mentioned its salty air. It was like being in a tropical island. Suddenly Louisa let out a yelp and a jump. A stray dog had strolled up to her, but it had no nose, and the doctor says that dogs on this planet have no noses. She skeptically asked him why, and the doctor just said it was something to do with genetics. They roamed across the market stalls. The doctor observed a thin paisley scarf and put it around his neck. Louisa gave a little chuckle and said his fashion sense is a little off. They then enter one of the local bars and the doctor insists that they should try the cocktails. One of the bartenders presented a plate with over about 12 different cocktails at the doctor and Louisa's table. The doctor picked up a twisty glass with a green neon liquor, garnished with crystal red berries and a small pink umbrella. He said it tasted fruity with oceanic tinge to it. Louisa meanwhile picked up a half glass with orange juice like liqueur, and the rim of the glass was covered in what seemed to be the top of a pineapple. She sipped it through a straw and then gagged. She said to him that it tasted like she licked someone's sweaty armpit. He gave out a little laugh and she noticed that he was on his fourth cocktail. Near their table was the female who was still looking for her missing partner. Missing posters were planted around the bar and on the streetlights. Louisa took notice of this and headed over to her. She asked if she was okay. The female in her upset state passed one of the missing flyers to Louisa and looked at it. Louisa felt sorry for her and asked when was the last time she saw him. She mentions one of the bars in the back streets and that's where she last saw him. Louisa, wanting to help, calls the doctor over. He walks to the table chomping on a small plastic bag of snacks and with a small umbrella on his ear. Louisa tells the doctor about the situation and shows him the missing person flyer. The doctor flicked the umbrella off his ear and started to question the female called Muley about her partner Relia's disappearance. Muley then takes the doctor and Louisa to the bar where Relia was last seen. The bar called Intaglio was closed until its evening hours. The doctor walked up and down, side to side and even spinning clockwise then anti-clockwise around the street. He then pointed to the streetlights and stated that there's no surveillance cameras in any of the streets. Muley was quizzical about this and wondered if the planet's government had suspended them due to financial reasons. Louisa thought maybe crime has been diminished over time, but the doctor just scoffed at these answers and thought maybe Barcelona might have a sinister secret laying amongst the architecture. Then Louisa heard a hovering sound coming towards them. The doctor turned and noticed a black hover van coming into their view. It quickly parked next to them and out came two of those bulbous baby-headed beings in their green surgeon gowns. Louisa and Muley screamed at the sight of them and got captured by them. The doctor intervened but ended up getting a needle stabbed into his collarbone and was thrown into a pile of nearby rubbish. Louisa screamed for him but got flown into the black hover van and sped off out of the back street. A little while later a couple of stray dogs started licking the doctor's face and he awoke. An old bag lady knelt next to him and tried to give him some charred finger food. The doctor gently pushed the food aside and got up to his feet. The old bag lady said if he'd been on the strong cocktails. The doctor said to her that he got ambushed and his companion got taken away in a black hover van. The old bag lady's eyes widened and gave a chilling response. In her mumbly words she's mentioned organ harvesters, kidnapping random people off the streets and strange men looking like bulbous babies. The doctor, still in a sort of sedated state, asked how she does this, and she said that it was gossip she overheard from the food stall vendors. The doctor thanked her, shook her hand and gave her a couple of credits in return. He stumbled away only to fall face first into the road and then got up again. The old bag lady watched on and still thinks he is drunk. Louisa's eyesight was blurry and wobbling side to side. When she finally came to her senses, she realized she was on a cold metal table. Her clothes were removed, exposing herself, and she was tied with leather straps. She looked over to her left and saw Muley. She was in a sort of pod and she crying. Louisa then noticed her forehead was covered in stitches with blood dripping, and Muley didn't speak but nodded her head to her right. Louisa turned right and saw what was Muley's partner Ilya. His forehead was also covered in stitches with some blood dripping, but he didn't move and his skin tone was like a jaundiced state. A door opened and one of the bulbous baby-headed beings entered in. It leaned over Louisa. She tried to wrangle her way out of one of the leather straps. She does so and whacks its bulbous head off. It smashed onto the floor and revealed what was underneath. A small scrunchy head with a large set of sharp mangled teeth, and Louisa screamed out loud at the sight. Another one emerged and presented her with a sharp circular saw. She continued to try and wrangle herself free before getting her forehead sliced. The doctor returned to the market stalls. He was coming out of his disorientation and thinks that those bulbous beings just injected a sedative into him to knock him out for a short time. In front of him was a man walking through the market, but the walking was jagged like if the man had suffered an electric shock. The doctor approached him and asked if he was okay. Its response became the opposite and the man started to strangle the doctor. The man let out a squealing but growling sound from its mouth. The doctor managed to tackle him and violently flung the man to the ground. It hit its head hard and the top of its skull became detached. Some of the market traders walked over and the doctor held his palm out to keep them back. He approached it and saw the brain flopping out. It looked like an overload blob of spinach that was still beating like a human heart, and the doctor looked at the uniform the man was wearing, knowing he was a factory worker. He looked at the name tag. Peshner, and he works at the Isley Food Preservation Company. Food distribution via frozen preservation. It reminded him of independent fishmongers and the Iceland supermarket chain. He then got a little distracted, saying to himself that he needs to go shopping again to Iceland as long he doesn't encounter the retired school governors the Reeds again, and goes on a whispery tangent about them taking the last of the special price items before he can. He then slaps himself in the face to try and focus on the current situation. He needed to locate the Isley Food Company and see if that's where Louisa and the other kidnaps have gone to. The circular saw got nearer to Louisa's head until it stops and a binging sound came from a hidden tannoy. A growling sound echoed through the room and the bulbous beings started to walk away from the metal table. Louisa looked on at them and continued to wrangle her way out. Suddenly she hears a banging sound coming from a corner of the room, and then the doctor emerges out of nowhere covered in shattered ice. Louisa was relieved by this but felt a little embarrassed that she was exposed fully. He jokingly said that she jumped on him for comfort when they were on Calaver and that she sleepwalks nude in the TARDIS. Louisa brushed it off slyly and he freed her. She then pulled his cream linen jacket off, saying she needs to cover it wherever he likes it or not. She then found some frozen small joints in his pockets. He said he took them and that he'll use them for supper later. She raised an eye at this and mentioned his cooking not being up to standard. The doctor and Louisa then looked at the bodies of Muley and Relia. Both them died due to what seemed to be botched brain transplants. Louisa sorely felt relieved that she didn't end up like them, but had that remorse feeling that they had reunited only to end up dead. The hidden tannoy started again blurting out that growling sound and the doctor's ears pricked up. By the sound of things it seemed to be a large creature of sorts. He then pointed his index finger to a large square door and said, if there's a large door, that's where evil lurks. They entered a large basement-like area. It smelt of damp sewage and had a humid feel about the place. Creaking and growling sounds were heard in the distance and the two continued slowly on. The doctor told her to cover behind a corner and told her to be quiet. He leaned his head and saw what seemed to be a giant alien lobster. The doctor knew what it was. A halwa. Louisa popped her head in and was surprised at the sight of it. The doctor explained to her that the halwa were presumed to be extinct due to a long lengthy battle with the Makra, but somehow a small faction have survived and he believes that they are trying to transplant their minds into the civilians of Barcelona. Suddenly a pair of hands slapped them on their shoulders and the doctor swiftly turned his head back. It was those bulbous beings again and they forcefully dragged him and Louisa towards the halwa. The halwa grunted viciously at them. The doctor took courage and shouted at it, saying the race should have been extinct long ago but somehow a measly few have survived. The halwa leaned forward and let out menacing growl. The doctor continued, trying to infiltrate and dominate society by preforming half-assed brain transplants isn't a suitable. They were mere prototypes that didn't stick the landing. Louisa tried to chime in to ease him off but he was showing full force and not stopping at a second of his breath. The halwa became menacingly agitated and strongly ripped off its support mechanism that it was attached to. It lunged forward at them and the doctor shouted at Louisa to duck quickly. Both of them did and halwa engulfed the two bulbous beings in one hole. The doctor then shouted run and he and Louisa headed to where they came from. The halwa jetted towards them only to ram itself into a section of low ceiling, knocking it out and the basement area started to collapse. The doctor and Louisa hurried out, leaving the transplanted corpses to be buried in rubble. The doctor and Louisa emerged out of the Isley Food Company. They walked a few yards across until Louisa complained that her feet were burning on the concrete and quickly started to climb onto the doctor's back, much to his chagrin. He had to piggyback her to the TARDIS and when they arrived he had to quickly let her go. He caught his breath and said he isn't doing that again. She let out a little chuckle and opened the door. She then pointed at him saying he'll better be good at cooking supper than last time. He promised with his fingers crossed behind his back and she entered in. The doctor looked at the architecture of the planet. He thought to himself that he might come back to this place in a future incarnation. He then got distracted again by one of the stray dogs which had cocked its leg up against the TARDIS and started peeing on it. He gently shooed it away and headed inside. Hopefully supper will be better than last time.